and it kind of goes backwards in time. So I did a couple of audio tapes on the history of evolution, 2 hours long, on the same kind of information. Who's teaching this stuff? Who influenced who anyway? Where did this idea of evolution come from? And only I started with the Garden of Eden and went the other direction with my audio tapes. So you can still get those tapes from our ministry called the History of Evolution, 2 audio tapes for $3 each if you want those. Where we cover most of the information in here on audio form. You can listen to it in the car.
Can we go back one slide?
Sure.
And because this is a question that I, too bad, just had about the question mark
right
over there.
Question above the flood.
According to the graph, it would look to be about 1 billion at the time of the flood.
Yeah. Nobody has a clue how many people were here.
Nobody has any idea.
All you can think of is they're probably having much larger families. If you have infinite food supply, no reason to limit the family, and living for 900 years, there's no reason to not have 100 kids per family. Some of the women are thinking, oh, brother, think of all them diapers. What did you say? Now you know why there was more than one wife? I don't know about all that. I had 3. It didn't hurt a thing. I don't know what the population was. I just made up a number. It could have been, some people honestly think there may have been lots more than we have today. Maybe 10 or 20 billion. I don't know. I don't think there's any possible way to tell. You know, you pick a number, because any number you pick is going to be based on several assumptions. So we don't know. The world is certainly not overcrowded, though. Thomas Malthus wrote a book called The Essay on the Principle of Population. In that book, and he talks about it on this paper I passed out, and you can read this later when you go home, just add that to your repertoire of interesting reading. But Malthus said the population grows geometrically, like it'll double every so many years. And the food supply grows arithmetically. It only grows by adding. You add, a certain percentage or a certain number to the food supply. Now, he's wrong, okay? Malthus was dead wrong. Because if you get more people on the planet, you now have more people available to plant the food. So it's wrong to say the food supply grows in a linear progression and the population grows geometrically. That's simply not true. But Malthus said that in his book. His book was written in the late 1700s, I believe, or early 1800s. Had a very profound influence on Darwin. Because Darwin read that and thought, wow, if there's more people born than can possibly survive, then it's really best if the weaker die off and the stronger survive. And you get a person with this kind of mentality. Well, look on the second page of this sheet I passed out here. On side 2 here. Herbert Spencer also wrote prolifically on this topic, saying, look, it's really best if the strongest survive and the weaker die off. I got a line underlined for you. Spencer said, if they are not sufficiently competent to live, they die, and it is best they should die. He's the one who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. Now, there's an interesting movie, I'm sure all of you have seen it, where this phrase comes up. He said, are there no poorhouses? If they're going to die, let them die and decrease the surplus population. He was talking about Tiny Tim. Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, right. Charles Dickens' book, The Christmas Carol. When you understand, that book was written during this time frame of the late 1800s when people had this mentality. Many of the laissez-faire capitalists said, hey, well, if they can't survive, it's their own problem. And we finally had to get lots of labor laws, child labor laws and stuff had to come in because they were working little bitty kids in the factories, He gets his arm cut off, oh well, get another kid. That really was the mentality because there's too many people anyway. That's a little bit of the mentality they have in China right now. People are expendable. Just throw them away and get another one. There's plenty of them out there. Somebody said if you lined all the Chinese up in a column, 4 people wide, 4 abreast, and started marching them into the sea at a steady march, you would never run out of Chinese. They're being produced faster than that. That's just the Chinese, not the rest of the world. Column 4, I don't know if that's true or who figured that out, but I suspect it probably is. They're being born awfully quick, The laissez-faire capitalists, or we can go off on a long rabbit trail there, but you might want to read this, get this book, Henry Morris's Long War Against God, if you want more on this topic of how the evolution philosophy relied on the idea that there are more people born on the planet than can possibly survive. Now, this is exact opposite of what God told Adam to do. God said, Adam, I want you to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Have lots of kids. Of course, the devil wants the opposite of that. And I'll show you in a minute why he wants the opposite of that. But Malthus wrote his book on the essay of population. Let's make that a quiz question. Heidi, who was one of the people that influenced Darwin's thinking? We'll have several before this course is over. Thomas Malthus would be the answer. He influenced Darwin's thinking. Darwin thought, because of Malthus's book, there are too many people, and therefore you come into this guy Spencer, who coined the phrase survival of the fittest, which we'll get into later, which, by the way, is not true. Now, the world is not overcrowded. A little bit of facts can undo a lot of erroneous teaching. Jacksonville, Florida, is the largest city, land-wise, in America. What they did in Jacksonville has about 800,000 people. They incorporated the entire county into the city limits because they had two governments, a city government and a county government. Well, why pay for sheriffs and police? Why have two separate systems of government? So I'm sure somebody got upset when they lost their job, but they ended up incorporating the entire county limits into the city limits. So when you drive into, I forget the name of the county now, it's not Dade County. Anybody? What? Duval County, yeah. When you drive into the county, you're also in the city. So it's 25 billion square feet in Jacksonville, Florida. Now, that's a huge city. If you've ever driven across it, it's a huge city. But 6 billion people on the planet could all get in there, and everybody have 4 square feet. A little crowded, not as crowded as an elevator gets. But you could probably fit everybody in Jacksonville, Florida twice, quite easily. So the world is not overcrowded. I tell people, have you driven across Kansas? Or Wyoming or Montana, where Eric went to school out there? Look, the world's not overcrowded, folks. I just flew out west, and Eric, you flew back. You look out the window and you think, where is everybody? I mean, there's zillions of miles of nothing. There's just nothing down there, folks. The world is definitely not overcrowded. I tell them, if it's overcrowded where you are, move. There's loads of room out there, okay? Remember we were up in South Dakota at the Seth, and what's her last name? Union Center. We stayed at their house several times. Anyway, Rodden. Okay, Rodden. He was talking about buying the property across the street. Remember that? He said, I'm thinking about buying that property across the street. I said, oh yeah? How much is it? He said, well, I think he said it's 1,000 acres. He wanted to add this lot to his farm. He said, but the guy wants $50 an acre. That's kind of high. $50 an acre. It's hard for us to comprehend that, I was in Hawaii, and it's $500 a square foot to buy property. It's just all a matter of where you are, I was in near downtown Los Angeles talking to the pastor there, and they were talking about buying property to expand their church, and he said it costs them about $1 million an acre to buy property. Just a matter of where you are, okay? They need to buy some of that South Dakota property and move it to Los Angeles. That would solve the problem. But the world is not overcrowded. Anyway, the population growth chart clearly shows that it could have easily started 4,400 years ago. I want you to look at go back to the one that's in the textbook here from Merrill's Science. I want you to see what they did with their population growth curve right there. Oh, hang on. They get to the year 1100, which would be the time the Vikings are running around. They chop it off, and it tapers down. Now they're saying in 7000 BC, there were just very few people on the planet, right? And then it kind of drifts back off 500,000 years. Well, this is all imagination. They think that a very small population of a few thousand or a few score thousand people were on the planet for 400,000 or 500,000 years. Wouldn't you have an inbreeding problem in a hurry? You have to marry your first cousin for 10 generations in a row till people start being pretty dumb after a while. Talk about redneck jokes, and they'd have a bunch of them, wouldn't they? This is just pure fantasy. The fact is very simple. The population growth curve tells us man has not been here for billions of years. 4,400 is plenty to account for all the people on the planet. Now, there are several different ways this can be arrived at. Some people use a factor and say there's 2.4 children per family, which I think is the world average or something like that. You can get this number, and it varies greatly from source to source, but you start with 8 people, and pick a generation time of